Hello, I'm Karen Hangartner, and I'm the Project Director for the Southern Regional Children's Advocacy Center, which is a project of the National Children's Advocacy Center. We are excited to bring this video series about secondary traumatic stress to you. In this video series, we have conversations with three of the foremost experts in secondary traumatic stress. And in these, we discuss how do these effects show up on individuals, and how does working in the field of secondary traumatic stress impact organizations, and then how do we conduct supervision in a way that's supportive for our staff. And then we'll also hear from Chris Newlin, the Executive Director of the National Children's Advocacy Center, to talk a little bit about the role that the senior leader plays in addressing secondary traumatic stress in the organization, and how do we go about creating healthy, supportive environments that support the staff that we're working with. In this video, you're going to hear Chris Newlin, who's the Executive Director of the National Children's Advocacy Center, talk about what is the role of the senior leader in creating secondary traumatic stress-informed organizations. What do senior leaders need to be aware of, and what do they need to be doing to create organizational cultures that are supportive and protective for staff? At what point in your career did you become aware of how working child abuse cases was impacting you and your coworkers?
I think those are two different questions. I recognized that it was affecting people pretty soon after I got involved, because some people that had been there longer, you could hear some of the comments they make. You could see some of how they would interact with others in a non-confrontational setting, or when there wasn't, like some high stakes. And then you would see maybe how they react in another setting. You could see it didn't take them long to get from 0 to 50. So that was one side. And I thought maybe it was a little bit different for me because I was new in the field. And I was so focused on the uptake of knowledge and learning things and seeing things that I was just still filling up myself with all this stuff. So I was so focused on knowledge acquisition that I thought, well, I can do this work. It's not an issue. I can really, this is interesting to me. I find it very intellectually, there's a lot of intellectual curiosity. There's all this activity and stuff that I'm taking in. But then I think you reach a point, and for me personally, when you've kind of taken in a lot of information, you suddenly reach this kind of tipping point where it's like, okay, I don't need more information. I kind of like a little peace and quiet now. So I think those were at different times for me.
How has your thinking and philosophy on secondary trauma evolved over time?
Well, I guess I'd probably maybe an analogy of our understanding of using batteries to power cars. There was a time we knew nothing. And when I first started in this field, absolutely nobody was talking about this issue. It was about, this is stuff you do and this is the way you go, and people, but there was no real talk about this having some impact on us. Again, this was back in the 80s, so there's many years ago, and we just didn't think about it. We didn't talk about it. We were so focused, again, kind of like the example of our personal journey. At that point, we were so focused on just trying to figure out what to do, what works, what the issue is, how much of a problem is it, that it was very basic issues. And being able to think about impacting people, it definitely over the last decade, I would say, have, taken a much greater appreciation for this issue, so much to the point that now, in many respects, this is the most important thing for a senior leader to do, is to create a healthy working environment.
What trends do you see in the field of child abuse that impact how organizations and individuals are impacted by secondary trauma?
Several things. I can't say just one. One is just the stereotype, and unfortunately in our field, sometimes we've created a culture of sacrifice, that the greatest heroes are those who have sacrificed so much of themselves to try to move the needle. And I'm not sure that's really a healthy thing for us to aspire to. Instead of it being a culture of sacrifice, we need to have a culture of healing and support. for both the clients we're working with and the content that's so powerful, but also for ourselves. That way we can be most effective. I really began to realize this when I would see turnover happening so fast. And, in other organizations, and people are like, I don't want to do that. So there's a lot of issues that affect it. There's not a lot of prestige in this work. You're almost a pariah. Like, I don't see how you do the work you do. Those things, like, okay, so I guess I'm strange. I guess I'm different. And a lot of that stuff where we're not part of the mainstream of society in a way where it's not accepted is an issue. So I think, if we're responding to the issue of children being sexually abused, which most parents might identify as one of the worst things that could happen in childhood, if we're responding to that and trying to do the right thing and trying to help people heal, shouldn't people be really excited about this? But there's still the stigma that creates some challenge with it, really, being able to feel whole at times.
How do you recognize when staff members are struggling with the effects of secondary traumatic stress?
It's different because different staff have different personalities, and we all show it in the different way. It's kind of like this idea that, with child sexual abuse, people always say, what are some signs that we should look for? Well, all over the place, different kids, different things, different ages. Just like for us as individuals, how we react to, stress is different. So it's hard to necessarily pinpoint. I would say that the biggest things that I see most commonly, the most common themes would be people who are taking a very kind of yes, no, black, white kind of quick decision. They hear a few facts and they're already jumping to kind of their working hypothesis, which is already starting to be etched in stone. So that's one I see. People who making snide comments, that are kind of beyond the, what you would expect. And then I see people who are having disrupted peer relationships with our colleagues. That's one that I would say that I see. And then people who just aren't doing their job, people who just are coming unprepared. Like, I just didn't, if on every case you say, I just didn't have time to get to it. Well, what did you have time to get to, So I think those are the ones that I see most commonly.
What role does compensation, benefits, and organizational support play in protecting staff from secondary traumatic stress?
I think there's a vast array of things that play an impact in that. But just because we work in a nonprofit doesn't mean all of our staff took a vow of poverty and they are, going to sacrifice anything just because they get to do stuff that means something. We all are maybe called in a different way to certain types of work. So I think it's important for the broader public to better understand that just because you work in a nonprofit doesn't mean you can't have a revenue positive year or people can't be compensated a fair wage for the work that they do, especially given all the impacts that child maltreatment has on our nation's health and economy many, many years into the future. I would say overall compensation, three big things I would say that are important to employees and building a sense of support is compensation, how they're being compensated, compassion, and then communication. I think those are three really big pieces that are a part of providing that supportive environment. Benefits as part of that overall compensation. The reality is we try to benchmark salaries and all that, but for people to know they have a safety net, that if something were to happen, that's something they don't have to keep kind of in their forefront. I can't imagine being in a situation where I was worried about, what support I had. I didn't feel much support. So it goes well beyond benefits. Benefits is one part of it, and trying to provide benefits that actually employees view as beneficial. It doesn't really help us. We're offering these benefits A, B, C, and you're like, I don't really use A, B, or C. I was really hoping to have D and E. So that's one thing, and that is a broad human resources kind of discussion. But there's a lot of other things. Having employees make sure they have the training they need so they can be successful in their job, making sure they have good supervision that is supporting them, making sure they have clear goals from the time they start in their first 90 days, and then feedback, so they're getting that feedback all along about how they're doing, and also checking out kind of how they're feeling about their work. And then having all the business tools you need, having the lights on, the AC working, having the necessary equipment to perform your job that is up to date, all of those things. There's a myriad of things. But I think at a bottom line, as a senior leader, I look at it as when people come to work, they don't have to worry. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we've taken care of. We have good Wi-Fi. We have good internet. We have all this stuff. All that stuff they can set aside. They can focus the energy they have on their work and on their clients. And that way, they don't have to try to figure out, well, I need to do IT support for my 3 neighbors who, because we don't have any support. So having all those supports there is really important, and maybe more important than the actual benefits that we offer.
NCAC has created a really healthy organizational culture, and part of that was the creation of a wellness plan. Can you talk a little bit about what's included in the wellness plan?
We broke that plan into a lot of different phases, kind of our pre-employment and employment screening activities, the onboarding for staff, the benefits that we provide to them, the what we're doing from a training perspective and supervision. All of these areas are different, components within the wellness plans. It started off as like, let's just start jotting down these ideas. Now it's turned into about a 4-page document at this point. But some specific things that we did. One is we include questions in our interview process, and we acknowledge this issue that working in this field can be challenging and difficult and what that might be like. So it's looking at that kind of issue. It's also in our benefits about, we now provide an additional 4 hours of leave every month that you have to use or lose that month for full-time employees. It encourages them to be taking their time off. When we do our performance evaluations, we like to get the reports of how much people are utilizing their time. If you have someone who's using a lot of their leave time, maybe there's a need to have a discussion about, what's going on. If there's someone who's hardly at all using theirs, is that really healthy? And we can also look at their average hours, like how many hours are they actually working per week, and see if we have someone who's not taking any leave time, is consistently working 92 hours every 2 weeks. Maybe that's not the healthiest thing. Maybe there needs to be a conversation about that. So part of our effort was, hey, you get these 4 hours, use it or lose it. And people can take a Friday afternoon off, or they can leave an hour early every Friday each month. Whatever they choose, it's a tangible way to get them training all of our staff on how to provide, supervision and reflective supervision. And we've also now provide a training series for all of our supervisors. Anybody who's a supervisor can come to these regularly scheduled meetings to learn about supervision related issues and how to be supportive and how to be engaging. The other thing we did for our direct care staff is we actually went through a secondary traumatic stress workbook, and it was some guided, facilitated conversations for those that were interested to be able to do that. Providing an orientation where people really get a good understanding of the NCAC is important. Making sure they have all their business. So there's so much that goes in there that is all about that building resilience.
How do children's resilience parallel professionals' resilience?
What is it that can help make kids more resilient? And it's amazing that the findings from what kids, who may have experienced trauma, those who are most resilient, and professionals who work in the field, is it's people who feel like this work means something. This work not only means something in the world, it means something to me. This is important. I feel like I'm making a difference. People who have a sense of good, healthy relationships with others, where there's some sense of connectedness, and those who have supportive, supervisors in their life, or parents or adults in their life. So those things support resilience in kids, who may experience trauma, but they also support resilience in our staff who are working in the same arena. So being able to attend to those types of issues, like why do you want to work here, can be a powerful question. But also, even with our staff, we've done surveys before where we just said, write down one reason, the number one reason why you work at the NCAC. And to go through those answers and see that this work, I want to do something that means something to me and makes a difference in the world and helps others who are in need. That's the kind of person who that really resonates with, that meaning making in life, which is a supportive and resilience building concept that we really benefit from having those people on board.
How how can the community and a board of directors play a role in supporting staff?
I think everybody has a role, board included. And actually, I would even extend that beyond the broader community. Thanking people for the work that they do, recognizing that we have staff that are putting themselves right in the front line of all this trauma that they're exposing. They're sacrificing a part of themselves to help out those who are vulnerable and in need. I think that's a great thing. So people play a role in increasing the credibility and the belief and the support for people working with traumatized populations as a broad, and reducing some of the stigma around that, I think, is the broader community. The board absolutely plays a role. So we make sure they're informed about secondary traumatic stress and the impact it has on our workforce, and that we're overseeing our programs and processes so that we're trying to remove as many institutional barriers that cause people frustration. And so the board absolutely. The other thing is a big focus this year is having the board present more, for them to be much more seen and engaged by our staff. Not that we want to interfere with our staff work, but just for them to know that here are people from the community who are volunteering their time to support the work that we're doing. I think that can be powerful.
What are some specific things that the board can do to support the executive director or senior leader?
The board of directors plays an important role at the CAC. Ultimately, they have one big decision, which is, do we keep the director or let the director go and go a new direction? That's kind of their one big decision every time, which is about oversight and their responsibility. But our board asked really a great question, which was, instead of us them asking me questions all the time, was a question of, what do you need from us? You're here every day with these folks. You're here running this. What is it that we can do that's going to help you and the organization as much as possible? Asking that question and allowing the director to share that can be very empowering and very supportive to the organization. So I would encourage boards to have that dialogue about, what is it you need from us? There's some things that we may try to give you that you don't need, but what is it you really need? And for a director to spend the time thinking about that and to share that, and then to work on that as clear plans. There should be a theme in everything that the board's trying to do, that it should help support those initiatives. Now, if the board says, that makes no sense to us, we don't understand that, well, maybe that person doesn't have the vision that's aligned with the board. I don't know. But having that dialogue about really what the board can do to be supportive, because then that all flows out to the staff too, about how the board are being supportive. Every year we do a holiday party. All of the gift cards on the tree, all that going to employees, all comes from board members. It's a clear way, a tangible way they can show the staff they care and they want to be supportive of them.
How do you build your own circle of support?
As far as my wellness, I think it's been a real journey for me. I think I will acknowledge that when there's been times when I have worked way too many hours, and part of that was I felt like, in a way, maybe I needed to prove myself. I felt like I needed to show that I was going to work as hard as anybody else, which is, I guess, important. You don't want to role model that, hey, the executive director works 24 hours a week and get paid full time, and while that's happening, we're all here. But you don't want to do that. But I was initially in my life so interested in learning and stuff. You couldn't overwork me. I'd be doing stuff all the time. It felt like, because I was just so intellectually curious. But I began to realize that you need to prove that you're going to work hard. You're going to be, as committed to this as I want others to be. And what I didn't realize is I reached this point of inflection where I began to see it from a different perspective, that, okay, I've proven the point, but now all I'm doing is modeling this culture of sacrifice that I'm talking against. I'm continuing to perpetuate this. And people are like, well, Chris is here till 6 on Thursday night. I guess I need to be staying longer, which becomes a very negative and unhealthy flywheel. This was brought to my attention by our leadership team, which is, I think this is about good open communication. One day, finally, somebody just brought it up and said, when I get emails from you on the weekends, it makes me feel like maybe I need to be working. And do all the rest of y'all feel that? Well, great. That was awesome that they brought it up. I had no awareness. My thought process was, hey, I sometimes I get up early in the mornings and I'm thinking about stuff. I maybe push out some emails, but nobody's going to look at that until Monday. No, it was popping up on their phone. It was popping up on their computer. They saw it, whatever. And it was like this subtle message like, hey, you need to be working 7 days a week. You need to be getting up at 5 a.m. like Crazy Chris, those kinds of things. And I was like, whoa, that's really informative. So now I don't send any emails out on the weekend unless it's a urgent issue, and that probably more so a text, just to give people the space. I've also started working more reasonable hours and not working these ridiculous hours, because I recognize that it's for my own well-being and my family's important to me and other activities are important to me, but it's also a way of modeling for the other staff that you can have boundaries, and it actually is a good thing to have boundaries.
How do you create a structure within the organization that supports a more secondary trauma-informed multidisciplinary team?
I think there is this awareness even with the supervisors. Typically supervisors are a little maybe more removed from the direct work and maybe a little more removed from understanding some of this. So part of it is, the first thing is really putting it on the table and saying this is an issue and acknowledging our own vulnerabilities, our own staff's vulnerabilities with this. And it's hard for anybody to deny that this work has some impact on them. I'll give you a great example. We had a detective who had an acute incident occur. Details aren't that important, but the supervisor talked to her right after this incident. The chief deputy, the sheriff, all came in and spoke with her about this. And she said, I want to go over to the CAC. Because there's some sense of support, because we're all in this together. It's a small part of what they do. It's a huge part of what we do. We build this sense of community. But what the supervisor did was smart. He called me. He just didn't say, okay. He called me and said, hey, I want to let you know, this is kind of what's going on. This is the most information we have. This is what's happening. So, this individual's, on their way over there. Can you kind of try to, be supportive? That's informed to know to call me and to give me the heads up so that we can help be supportive. And we're not coming from this, we don't even know what's going on. There's more support and understanding. So for the supervisor, we bring it up at all of our supervisors' meetings for them to be, us to be talking about this issue and what we can do to be supportive. And part of it is, again, more of the proactive stuff, making sure our team has the training for them to have some autonomy and control over their life. Like, hey, we got this symposium coming up. What's content you'd like to be able to see presentations on? Being responsive to them and supporting them is, I think, very important, but doing it at all levels. So the frontline professionals, with the supervisors, even with the senior leaders, for the senior leaders to be aware, and they're here with our board members often, and for them to reaffirm the interagency agreement that we have, and just a small piece of them being recorded in media, talking about the importance of their institution, their organization being involved in this work and how the collaboration is so, key. That sends a message that this is a priority. This is something that we support. And that is supportive to employees who may otherwise feel like, I don't even know if anybody recognizes what I'm doing over here.
Do you think senior leaders of multidisciplinary teams are open to talking about and being educated on the effects of secondary traumatic stress?
Well, I think it's all a matter of how it's presented and how it's shared. I recently heard someone talking about, if you talk about teaching someone relaxation exercises versus tactical breathing, that puts it into a nomenclature. But they also know this stuff because, think about the firing range. You use tactical breathing at the firing range. You take a deep breath, you exhale, you focus, you center yourself. It's basically what they're teaching without knowing is mindfulness. Really getting into that moment, not shutting out everything else. That's the same thing. So they do it, but they don't use the same language. So we need to make sure we're communicating to them in a way that makes sense, because most supervisors are like, well, I can only keep folks over here for 3 years. Okay, so you're basically saying, yes, I recognize this work has an impact on people. Well, how do we mitigate that? How do we make sure that if they are here 3 years, that it's the most successful and healthy 3 years? And when that 3 years is up, this person isn't completely spent and almost ineffectual in continuing their career because of trauma that we've exposed them to without that consideration.
If organizations want to actively address secondary traumatic stress, where do they start?
First, hopefully they wouldn't say I have all the answers. So I want to be humble in trying to respond. I think we're still trying to figure that out. And for us to say, oh, I've got this is a no-brainer. No, we have a wellness plan that we've developed here at the NCAC. It's a living, breathing document. We come up with new ideas. We expand on that. So it's something that continues to evolve. If we ever say we have it, I would say that's a problem. But I would say some of the things that I would say are necessary, but not necessarily sufficient. Is people who are talking about this openly, and a senior leader who is definitely talking about this issue and creating a culture where it's okay to talk about this issue. Where there is really the support for implementing practices that help foster wellness within our employees, to assure that they're going to have the best supports that we can provide to them. Having a facility and a sense of team where there's support between colleagues, where they feel a sense of support both from their peers, but also their supervisors, where there's always, situations where there's reflective supervision and supervising are asking that most important question near the end of any conversation: is there anything I can do to help you? Or what can I do to help you? Where that is openly invited. Those are some hallmarks that I would say have to absolutely be there. We just can't continue this culture of sacrifice and feel like we're ever going to truly make progress, the progress that we desire.
What do you look for during the interviewing and hiring processes that let you know that a person has the ability to work in these high trauma exposed environments?
I think it can depend maybe on the role. Some people have more direct exposure to it than others. So there's obviously a difference between maybe a forensic interviewer or a clinical director and let's say a finance director who's going to be a bit more removed. But everybody is at some depth of the pool. We are all in the pool. Some people are in maybe a little bit of deeper water than others, and we move around from time to time. But I would say probably the most impactful thing, there's a couple of things that really stand out to me. The first is really the use of our operational values as a way to help identify those who will probably best fit. We know that our best employees are our employees who really embrace those 4 areas of, going above and beyond, commitment to excellence in everything we do, teamwork and innovation. But those are our 4 core operational values. We know that our best performing employees are people who really embrace those. So including in the interview process, specifically querying about those, it's not, some of the background experience and stuff is important, but finding people, and I'm not saying everybody needs to be monolithic. We are incredibly diverse, but people who have these themes of innovation and a commitment to excellence, and going above and beyond, where they can really, and teamwork, where they can really talk about that in a meaningful way. That's I think one very important part. And also during reviews of that reflective supervision about going back to those and what they've done, where they've maybe struggled, is really helpful. The second piece to me that is really important is having a candid conversation in the interview process about how it might be for them to work in this type of setting. I had a candidate for a position who was an outstanding candidate, was on that short list, and we were having, this individual had never worked in child abuse, but had some really amazing talents. And at the end of the interview, near the end, we spent some time talking about how do you think it might be to, be working in this environment around this issue. And although not directly exposed to it, talking about this issue. And the person said, that's really something I probably should think about. Thanks for asking that. And I said, just take some time. And we kind of identified a time at which point she would get back in touch with me. That day comes, that day goes, no response. Hope everything's okay. Ultimately, a few days later, after I reach out, I get a response back. And that question was important. That person really spent some time thinking about it and basically came to the decision, as much as I believe in the work that you do, and as much as I will actually continue to be a donor, I just for myself don't think that that's the right setting for me. I'm not sure it's going to be healthy for me. Well, I'm glad we knew that, both of us knew that before we actually made a hire or an offer. So being able to have that candid conversation with candidates about this is really important, and that we recognize that we talk about this issue.
How do you create a sense of trust and safety that allows staff to be open about the impacts of secondary traumatic stress?
This is a slow flywheel turn. You can't rush this. The more you rush it, the more it won't happen. You have to be consistent. You have to do what you say and say what you do. You have to provide at all levels, support and recognition of this issue. You can't rush it. It's just something that takes time, and you have to be patient and you have to be committed to it. So there is no magic panacea that happens overnight. The magic is when you start to really build that and continue to support that, and people really build true relationship with one another, and we are looking out for each other, and and feel like the organization's looking out for us, where it's not always like the man's out to get me kind of thing. Those are when you can get to that point, which takes time and commitment and consistency. I think it goes back in some ways to we model what we want, and working reasonable hours, having reasonable expectations, sometimes saying I'm not going to be able to, no, I can't do this now. And really identifying, what are true things, the most important things we need to pay attention to, and what are some things maybe that we can let go. Those are very important, but also it's important to monitor and acknowledge for ourselves. There have been times in this work that I have felt like I've really done something valuable. I have truly made a difference. I moved the needle in a big way. There are other times where I felt like, what am I doing? Why does this board continue to employ me? Like, I'm so ineffectual. I can't figure this out. I'm not. And so I think it's okay to acknowledge, like, I'm not like hitting on all cylinders today for whatever reason. And I think making it okay is one thing. The other is acknowledging that we all make mistakes. And when people make mistakes, of being supportive while still there's some accountability, but still being supportive. I think showing that modeling is everything for a senior leader.
What do you wish you had known about the impact of working child abuse cases when you first started out in this career?
I think there's a level of understanding and intimacy sometimes that people who work together in this issue just have an understanding, kind of like, hey, we've been there, we know what that's like. That's hard sometimes to communicate to family members and those who we're in relationship with. It's hard for them to really understand maybe where we're coming from, and being able to communicate about that more effectively would have been great. Even just the awareness that, like, sometimes when I come home from work, I'd be perfectly happy to just put on a pair of shorts and tennis shoes and go out and mow the grass and not talk to anybody. Just because it's a way to kind of center myself. There is something oddly, kind of repetitive, and and there's a little bit of very basic mindfulness about just following the line. I don't have to think too much, but I am doing something. I can sit back at the end of it and look at it and say, oh my gosh, the grass looks really nice. I feel good about it. Plus I sweat, and that felt good to get some exercise. All, whilst, when I go in the house and I'm like kind of feeling, oh man, that was good. I had a good day at work and I was able to do this. So my mind's a little clear. And it's like, how come you don't want to spend time with us? So I think being able to better communicate and understand this when I was younger might have been really nice It would have been helpful.